Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Keep the Line Moving, the podcast designed to talk about leadership, life, and inspiration. I am your host, Chris Gargano, and we have an important topic to discuss today: stress, specifically the Microstress Effect. Karen Dillon is our guest, and she co-wrote a book with Rob Cross called The Microstress Effect: How Little Things Pile Up and Create Big Problems. We're going to mainly focus on professional problems and stresses, but we'll also bring it in and interrelate it with personal issues. This is a fascinating discussion about a small interaction or an email or a meeting gaze can have an effect on how your stress builds up throughout the day. This conversation is interesting. We uncover a lot. You'll be the judge, as I always say, and the conversation begins now with Karen Dillon. It's no secret that I'm a gigantic baseball fan. I assume you are, based on where you're sitting right now and a ballpark that you're very close to. Tell us about that, please.
Well, I think what excited you was not the fact that I am in Brookline, Massachusetts, which is what I am, but I am walking distance to Fenway Park. So it is part of my kind of everyday life, and the sounds, everything from the concerts to the games. I am a lifelong Red Sox fan, having grown up in the area. So pretty cool to live this close.
We start this conversation with a little bit of envy because you're so close to a wonderful mecca of baseball, and you wrote this unbelievable book with Rob Cross called simply The Microstress Effect. Congratulations on a book that I think will speak to people in so many ways, and that's what we'll uncover in the next few minutes. Tell us about the genesis and why the both of you wrote on this very important topic.
So the microstress effect is probably a term you haven't heard of before, microstress, but that's something that came out of research that Rob and I did with high performers. And it was not what we were looking for. What we were looking for, we did deep dive research with 300 people who were identified as high performers by their own organizations. So people that were unquestionably doing really well at work and in life. People saw them as sort of at the top of the pile. And we were expecting to learn what they do better than the rest of us. So it was sort of a best practices and what can we learn from how these people network their relationships in their life, et cetera. But what we ended up learning was something that really surprised us. Really, in the beginning of our interviews, after we got a little bit, past the surface level where everything was sort of sunshine and roses for these people, we started to realize that many of these people who the world thought was sort of the best of the best of the best were actually sort of holding on by a thread. They were holding their life and their work together, but they were always feeling under the gun. They were always feeling under pressure. They did not feel like the best version of themselves at all. And in some cases, it got quite serious. People would break into tears, or they would share with us how overwhelmed they felt. And what was surprising and interesting was it was never really one big thing that we would all understand: a death in the family, a divorce, a sick child, things like that. But it was sort of dozens and dozens of tiny things that felt so small they were almost felt stupid mentioning them, but whose effect really had a debilitating effect over time, and they layered up. So we started calling those little tiny things microstress because they happen so quickly that people almost don't recognize that they're happening. And they seem silly individually, but cumulatively they were taking an enormous toll. So the microstress effect refers to the fact that all these individual small things that happen to us in our interactions with other people that we're close to at work or at home that seem so insignificant can really add up in a way that really derails you from your best performance, your best life, the microstress effect.
Wonderfully put. And, and the book, like I said, is so important because those micro stresses can be, Karen, you get up from your desk, you walk down the hall. And the way you and Rob articulated in the book is that it could be a chance encounter that you obviously weren't expecting from somebody that you may have a meeting with later that that could potentially be a confrontational or a difficult conversation. But that initial high, I'm just using one of the many great examples you have in the book of where you can read into body language or word choices of that individual, and that will alter your cortisol, right, in your body to how you will perform later in that other meeting. I'm on the tip of the iceberg. You take it from here and articulate, please, exactly what little micro stressors can be.
So we put them into three broad buckets, and I won't describe, we had 14 common categories, but the three broad buckets might be useful for people to think about. And all of us have all of these things happening in a given day, a week, month. The first bucket, which I think everyone will relate to, are microstresses that drain your capacity to get things done. And for me personally, it's the sticky notes all over my computer. It's the emails I'm digging out. I'm literally trying to I make it unread so I can go back and see it. Where in the thread is it? It's the person in the hallway who suddenly seems to have a slightly different proposal or agenda or topic for the meeting you're going to have later. And you're, wait a minute, I'm not prepared for that. Is this a change in something? And so it's all the kind of little interactions that somehow make you feel like you're always behind. You wake up and you look at your email and there's 15 things already that you're not feeling on top of. So small misalignments with colleagues, small performance misses, someone that you're working with just underdelivers a little tiny bit, and then you have to kind of make up for it. And suddenly you've now taught them that you will make up for their little 5% under delivery. All these small things that sort of just get in our way of being in control of our day and our work. So those are the microstresses that drain our capacity to get things done. All of us have those, and you can see them on your calendar, and you can see them, again, in my case, on my sticky notes. But the ones that are a little more invisible but are equally powerful, maybe even more powerful, are microstresses that drain your emotional reserves. So microstresses in general, they're not things that we think people are deliberately doing to be jerks. It's not a toxic relationship. It's not a really crazy, unreasonable client or just a kind of jerk boss. They're just normal interactions where something is misaligned and there's some tension in some way. And one of the things that you mentioned, even walking down the hall, picking up from that person, is a microstress that would drain our emotional reserves is picking up secondhand stress. So I'm not stressed yet, but you've made me stressed because suddenly you're stressed about the project or the deadline, or you're very worried about what the new manager is going to think of our whole department. And suddenly now I've absorbed your stress. I didn't have it before, but now you've planted it in my mind. Who doesn't wake up in the middle of the night thinking of some stress that somebody else has given to them to think about? I didn't even know to worry about that. That's a really real, physiologically real phenomenon, that the expression, I feel your pain. There's been really interesting research on the mirror neurons in our brain that shows that if we're in the room with someone who's experiencing pain that we care about, our brains process that as if we're experiencing the same pain as well. So we are very vulnerable to secondhand stress, and it becomes real. It takes a real physical toll on us as well. And the third category are microstresses that challenge your identity. And the number one thing we've been sort of continuing our work and asking people which of the microstresses they most relate to. And so far, the number one that has been fairly universal that falls into this category are negative or draining interactions with friends and family. So this isn't, again, truly toxic, horrible. It's just you have a squabble with your sister, or you don't feel good about how you left your house in the morning. You squawked at your kids, or you were curt with your spouse. It's not that relationship's in terrible shape or things are falling apart. It's that you don't feel good about yourself. It's challenging my identity as a sibling or as a parent or as a spouse. Like, I don't feel like I was a great sister today. And those small interactions can kind of just chew up at us during the day, and they affect us for the rest of the day. So the key about microstress is it's not just the moment of microstress, which again are so brief, our brains literally barely register them. They're just so quick that they don't imprint on our frontal lobe, which is where our working memory is, in the same way, but our bodies know that they happen. But they linger. They have secondary and even tertiary consequences. So it just sort of adds up all day in these tiny ways in those three different buckets. And most of us have forms of all of those types of microstresses.
And Karen, we were talking before coming on today in that we're not just receiving microstresses or observing microstresses, we're also causing them. And I find that also fascinating because, in as you're articulating the three categories, there are people probably listening thinking, oh, yes, I'm a victim of that. I'm a victim of that. I've experienced that. But we also are the protagonist. And in these certain situations, antagonists, we have both roles. So tell us, please, about ways we can spot microstresses. And being aware, I would assume, would mitigate the damages, for lack of a better way of saying it.
It definitely does, because the simple way I say, if you can name it, you can claim it. If you sort of understand that this is happening to you and that you're doing it to other people. Again, microstress is not from some evil place. It just happens in the busyness and hecticness of trying to get through our lives. But if you recognize that you may be doing it to other people too, you can try to stop doing that, or at least pick a couple of things that you're not going to do that are going to trigger microstress for others, because it's not just a nice thing to do. It is a nice thing to do, but because it's probably helping you too. Most microstress that we cause other people will rebound back on us. It's like a boomerang. So eventually, if you're causing your kid lots of stress by micromanaging their homework, or overly checking in on how are their summer job plans coming up, and you're kind of peppering them with secondhand stress, right? You're passing your stress about it onto them. Eventually, and maybe sooner rather than later, that's going to boomerang back with a bad attitude or sullen or not talking to you. Same thing's true with the star employee, right? You keep heaping new expectations and shifting things you're asking on your star employee. Eventually, they're, God forbid, but they might burn out, or they'll want to leave you or leave your department. You will feel the result of the microstress you cause others. So one of the exercises we ask people to do, we have a chart that you can go through in the book. It's in chapter 5 in our book, where we ask you to take 3 passes through this chart, and it's the 14 common sources of microstress, types of microstress, and the common sources. And the common sources range from family to colleagues and a key stakeholder or client. It's a range. There are a range of people that can cause you microstress. And take the first pass through and pick 2 or 3 that are systemic enough, they're happening frequently enough that it's really affecting your performance, and you think you could try to find ways to push back on it a little bit. So first pass, pick 2 or 3, and people often go through and say, I have all of these. Like if it's everything, it's nothing. You have to pick 2 or 3 to focus on, but 2 or 3 can make a really material difference if you can find ways to eliminate a couple. And then we ask you to do another pass and go through and take an honest assessment of, where am I causing other people microstress unnecessarily? Again, systemically, not just one-time things, but things that I'm probably routinely doing. Pick 2 or 3 of those and say, I'm going to stop. I'm going to try to find ways to do it better. I'm not going to stop people in the hallway with a new idea. I'm going to schedule a few minutes into our meetings at the end to make sure we're on the same page. Figure out ways that you can find ways to minimize that for other people. And then the last pass is, take an honest assessment of, can you just let go, rise above a couple of these things? They're not going to go away. You have to live with them, but maybe they're really not going to change your life. And in 10 years, it won't matter. In 5 years, it won't matter. In 1 year, it won't matter. We can get in sort of vicious cycles of being obsessed with things that end up kind of taking us down more than we don't ever correct the problem. The problem can't change or can't go away. I had some years where I was sort of obsessed with colleagues who I thought were politically maneuvering and getting favors. And in the end, I sort of realized, it doesn't affect it's only affecting my performance by being obsessed with it and sort of overly spotting and pointing out flaws and doing whatever. I just decided to be a great employee and hope good things came to me. And that's what eventually happened. But I had to choose to rise above that. So make an active sort of assessment of what you can really maybe change. And small changes can make a really big difference. We know that there's lots of years of research that tell us a negative interaction can have up to 5 times the impact of a positive interaction. So for many people, the natural stress response is things that will make me stronger to deal with all the stress that I'm doing, internal grit, find it, meditation, yoga, mindfulness, solo time. Those are all good things. But we think it's a higher leverage opportunity to remove a couple of sources, a couple of the negatives of stress, rather than just trying to make yourself stronger and stronger to deal with it. So if you can just take away a couple of microstresses, you'll feel the impact.
So the process of elimination, I love that. That's a very interesting way of looking at it, because you're right. High achievers will go to journaling, meditation, breathing, self-awareness, and those are all fantastic. But taking a more proactive approach and eliminating some of the ways in which are the elements that are causing you stress. But let's go back to the centering of ourselves. I had Will Clark on, the 15-year Major League Baseball legend, a few episodes ago, and he talked about, and let's look at this. Let's look at this, Karen. High achievers may not even want to talk comfortably about their meditation processes or how they deal with stress, right? They just want to forge forward, get things done, and I'm awesome. But Will said, in big moments against great pitchers, in high intensity situations, he breathed and he took time to realize what is going on, became present, so he can then go in to the 3-2 count or with bases loaded or whatever the case may be. So my point is, when you interacted with your initial study with those high achievers, to what degree were they self-aware? To what degree did they not blame? To what degree did they have a well-rounded approach and an open-mindedness perhaps to rectifying what is going on in their daily interactions?
I don't think they were aware, and I don't think they were aware in general of how stressed they were. That's why microstress is so insidious, really, is because when someone said to us, it's just life, and it is just life. But when you kind of break down, what does that mean? What's happening to you? Why are you exhausted every day? They hadn't, it's the frog in the boiling water. They hadn't taken time to realize that the temperature was getting hotter and hotter till it was getting to be too late. So they were not self-aware of the stress they were under, at least at that kind of high intensity. But many of them were actually good at finding some version of what you're talking about. There's some moments of personal reflection. One of our best people, we started calling the people who manage stress best in our research, the 10 percenters. And one of the best people, he was just sort of exemplary in so many ways, super successful, but really had managed to not let microstress in his life or big stress in his life derail him. He kind of had a really great balance. Like, he journals every single Sunday night. He sort of sits down. He has goals for himself, very personal goals about the kind of roles in life he wants to perform. He wants to be a great dad. He wants to contribute to his community. He wants to contribute to the knowledge of his company, things like that. But he holds himself accountable by doing a personal journaling exercise every Sunday night. That became part of his routine. So the people who worked those things into their routine were actually generally better at managing with the stress. But the problem was a lot of people didn't quite realize what they had let go over the years in terms of those kinds of things. And they didn't quite realize the level of stress they were at now.
Let's ask this, Karen. Okay, so high achievers again, and this is for everybody, but your study is based on those initial findings. It's the relationship with one's ego, right? And one's ego can be, there's an old joke that we used to use in my earlier days in professional life was, hey, he's a great person, but we have to make an appointment with his ego. That's kind of a funny little aside. But my point is, some people have, let's just call it interesting relationships with their ego, and with that comes the propensity to want to control issues. And when you can control an issue in your mind, you can mitigate stress. Where am I going with that? And what does the ego have to do with one's relationship to stress?
Well, I'll think of it. That's a really interesting observation. I'll come in from a slightly different angle. I think people who are high performers, high achievers, get kind of addicted to the ROI on their energy and their time. And so they sort of build this world for themselves where they need to have an obvious return on investment of their time and energy. So they do the things that will feel like they're getting rewarded. So they take more things on. They accept more responsibility. They want to be seen as the star of the organization. They never, not complain, but sort of push back or reprioritize because they want to be the, please put me in, coach, I can do it. So I think people get addicted to that kind of feedback mechanism of always exceeding expectations and doing more and being the superhero. And again, many of these people, most of the people in our research were seen as sort of superstars in their organization, but they didn't realize the extent to which they were sort of fueling it themselves. So maybe the microstress category of challenging your identity, that's one of the problems. Their identity is built on who I am as a performer, and I need to be a star. So I'm going to let anything that feels uncomfortable, it doesn't make me feel like a star, I'm going to ignore or not pay attention to. And the things that sort of reinforce that I'm a star are the things I'm going to feed into. And it's a kind of dangerous cycle. It is, it's the ego is making a point with the ego, because what happens is their lives become more and more narrow as they go through life. Every decade, first you sort of don't spend as much time with your childhood family because you're focusing on your career. Then you don't spend as much time with your friends because you're focusing on your family. And then you sort of every decade you lose sort of parts of you that used to be how you thought of yourself. Most of us, maybe in college, we're thinking we were at our best selves. We were creative and athletic and had really good friends, and we were the concert people. And little by little, particularly these high performers, they kind of left that stuff by the side of the road as they kind of focus more and more on getting their identity from work. And then it finds that if your identity is largely based on work and home, your life becomes very one-dimensional, and the microstresses can really derail you because there's nothing to mitigate it in your life. Any slight or microstress at work that feels like it puts you off track is going to take on a greater importance than if you have a lot of things going on in your life. And you know what? That puts that all in perspective.
Talking about perspective, that is fascinating what you just said. This is a totality. This isn't just how you behave at work. This is how you are as a friend, a father, a mother, a sister, a brother, etc. And you alluded to that initially in our conversation. So let's look at this. What about justifying a means to an end? Okay, with microstressors, right? So let's look at this. Someone says, my goal is as a father is to put my children through college. And what I do at my workplace, as long as I meet that altruistic goal per se, or how they're framing it in their brain, everything is okay because I'm a great dad. I'm putting them through these colleges and setting them up for the rest of their lives. However, they're hurting people, for lack of a better term, by causing them stress in the workplace to justify that goal. How does this interrelate? Because now we're combining professional and personal, and it's maybe it's steady here. That's a great goal to put your kids through college, but you're dropping off and you're hurting people in the process. I keep using that term, hurting, causing micro stresses
Yeah.
in the process to others at your workplace. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, it's a great observation, because that is exactly something that we found with many of the people in our research, is that they did justify it as I am a great provider. My family wants for nothing. And for many of them, that was a successful formula for a long time, but they often talked about one step too far that just sort of made things worse. They bought a house that was maybe a little bit of a stretch, and it meant they could never get off of that treadmill. Or we have a great story in the book of a guy who was a really, really successful salesperson, and he had a business trip canceled at the last minute, a beautiful May day, and he pulled into his driveway, having just realized he could get, he was on his way to the airport, he didn't have to go. And he pulled into his driveway, his kids were off doing their own thing, his wife was off doing her thing, and he realized, I literally have no one I could call. Like, I don't even know what to do with myself. There's nothing in my life except for my work and my functional role in this family. And he just sat there like, what have I done? What is this all for? Like, there's literally nothing for me but my role as a provider. So it's not that those things are important, of course, but when it becomes all of how you see yourself, or you take that step too far, there actually a reverse example. There was a guy in our research who had been offered a job, a promotion, company merge, offered a big job at the acquiring company that would have given him, in bonuses, et cetera, an extra $500,000 a year, but it would have meant moving to a whole different city. And he came close to taking it. And then he just sort of stopped and took stock, and he ended up having a pickup basketball game with one of his childhood friends from the town he lived in, his hometown, where his community was. And the friend's like, man, this isn't you. Why, look at what you'll be leaving behind. We have this great community, and you're really a wonderful part of it. And he didn't take the job. He ended up still being successful. He veered to another organization. But there are moments where you have a choice, where you're going to continue to only define yourself that way. Or you can say, I'm pretty good, and I need to make sure I have these other things in my life, so I'm not the guy that pulls into my driveway and literally has nobody to call.
What about legacy, Karen? You think about one's legacy, and then you look back, and then you create your life and you create your behaviors to get to that legacy. Describe how that comes into it.
I think it's a great observation, and I think that's really important. And that actually intersects with some work I've done with Clay Christensen over the years. We worked on a book together called How Will You Measure Your Life? And Clay Christensen was a very well-regarded Harvard Business School academic, but his last class of every semester was the one that everybody wanted to come to, and it really had nothing to do with business. It was sort of asking the question, how will you measure your life? And if you don't know the answer to that question, how are you going to get there? What is your strategy to achieve it? So I think it's really important you may evolve over time, but to have a goal and think about what do I want my legacy to be? And you're never going to achieve it if you're not going towards that goal. You may be imperfect, you may take side steps, you may shift it. But if you kind of let life bob along and you never make any active choices about, what do I want my legacy to be? What do I want people to say about me, at my funeral? Who do I want to leave behind? And am I going to be missed or not? There was a woman in our research who had worked crazily for years in her job, and she really self-defined by the job, and she thought, this is who I am. And she was very proud of her work. And then her mom got sick and died, and people knew she was close to her mom. She wasn't married. She didn't have a family of her own. And nobody came to the funeral. And that was just a sobering moment for her, that my legacy is going to be that I worked harder than everybody else. That's not the legacy I want. I need to have relationships. I need to have people who will miss me. So I think how can you possibly get to your goal if you don't know where you're going?
Wonderfully said. All right, let's in the book obviously comes up the concept of empathy. Now, empathy is a simple term, but has gigantic side effects and benefits if one is an empathic thinker and behaves in that way. Describe the importance of empathy to minimize micro stresses, either receiving them or giving them.
So there are two parts of that are really interesting. Obviously, the importance of empathy. I mean, it's hugely important if you're a manager, if you're a colleague, if a human being, in your life, because if you don't understand, put yourself in the shoes of the other people that you're working with, potentially triggering microstress for, expecting things of, you'll never understand the impact that you're having on them, and it could well be a negative one. So being empathetic, even just taking a moment to just think about what does this feel like for this person, is going to go so far into building your relationship, building trust. It's not just that makes you a nice person. It's going to help you too, because you and that person, whoever you're interacting with, are going to start to build an understanding of one another and be human with each other. I think one of the things we found in the research were people who found opportunities, even for small moments of human connection. That was a really powerful kind of antidote or inoculation to microstress, because their lives were richer and they saw human beings. They didn't see projects and deadlines. It was all part of it, but empathy is key to that. But one thing that we thought was really interesting in the research was we looked at the people who were better at rising above microstress, our 10 percenters, what they did better. And one of the things they did really well was develop what we call a resilience network. So most of us have people we kind of turn to when life's not going well. It's often a spouse or a best friend, and we want empathy for them. We want them to sort of, yeah, you're right, they don't appreciate you, or that's not fair, you work so hard. And sometimes that feels really good, but that can also be destructive to our ability to be resilient, because we sort of get into the doom loop of feeling sorry for ourselves. And so it's too much empathy or only empathy when we're going through a difficult time doesn't necessarily make us actually more resilient to whatever happened to us. So a resilience network is, you need to have different people and different kinds of relationships in your life, not all ride or die friends, but a mentor and a colleague you really trust, or someone who's worked in your job before that can help you with the different sources of resilience. So empathy is one. Another one might just be the ability to laugh at things. We all have someone that we like to laugh at the absurdity of things, but then we also need people who kind of kick our butt. You know what? You can be sorry for yourself for 2 days, but then get back in. That's your life is still good. Keep going. Or someone who can help us find a path forward. This may be difficult. How about if you approached it this way, or think about it this way? So being in a loop of expecting and needing and kind of constantly feeding empathy with just one or two people in our lives can become a way that we actually never are able to rise above the stresses of our life. So you need a resilience network. And a good way to assess is if you look at the sort of list of things that people can help you be resilient with. If you're constantly turning to the same one or two people, you probably don't have a resilient enough network for yourself.
That's very interesting and very valuable. All right, a couple more for you, Karen, and then we'll get to the all-star moments at the end, okay? And I hope you enjoy that too. Karen, let's look at this. What about the difference between being kind and being nice? And let's talk about the concept of kindness and the courage to be kind. Again, similar to empathy, but a slightly different, a little, and you can even probably say more broad. Where does kindness fit into minimizing microstresses? Again, and I'll phrase it this way again, giving a microstress to somebody and or receiving it in our daily actions.
That's great. That's a great insight, actually. And I literally used to quote Mr. Rogers as a parent, when I was a kid. I remember his advice to parents was, to myself, not to my kids, be kind but firm. So being kind is obviously understand what it feels like, be caring enough about the person to be candid or set boundaries or do whatever, so that it's going to continue to be a good relationship and a constructive relationship in some ways. And as you said, just being nice is superficial and not necessarily, it's not going to everything we suggest in the book is about making the interactions with people you care about better and strengthening those relationships. So I think that's really great advice. I actually, as a manager over the years, when I first started firing people, I've had to fire people at a time. The first person I ever fired, I was ridiculously nice, because it was just almost like, it's not you, it's me. But the person deserved to be fired. But I had such a hard time going through that. I didn't want to hurt them in the firing, when of course the kinder thing to have done, and I did it ever since then with anyone that reported to me, was to give them constructive feedback all along, so that you're never blindsiding them with this fake, nice firing, but you're actually building trust and building a relationship where kindness is being honest, but not in a harsh way, is helping them grow, is again, building trust between the two of you. I think that's a really valuable distinction. And I think kindness in microstress management is really important, because kindness might be recognizing that, yes, you know what, I did just shift the expectation on you. Let's sit down for 5 minutes and just kind of get back to, you've been working on this and I need you to shift to this. How can I help you do that? Or Kindness is taking 5 minutes at the end of a meeting just to say, are we on the same page? Like, I think what we've just said is, I'm going to do this and this by Tuesday. You're going to do this. Are we in agreement? Sending the follow-up email. There's clarity in kindness and empathy that is good for everybody in the vicious sort of spiral of microstress that we all face.
And the way the world is today, it's needed. And I really believe that. And we go back to, you and I had the conversation as part of this, a greater conversation about the ego, right? And the ego says, forge forward, be the boss, the hierarchical, the traditional ways in which we do things. But if we take a step back and show some humility, which takes courage, it takes courage to show humility. And at times for people that are hard charging and high achieving, it takes courage to take a step back and show that kindness and say, hey, just what you just said beautifully, like, hey, did I go over this clearly? How do you feel about this certain situation? And that's important. It takes a few minutes, and then the person leaves the meeting feeling, empowered rather than stepped upon and another micro stress. Karen,
there's a great example. I just want to add, there was a manager we were talking to who's sort of adopting all the microstress thinking, and he had gone with it. His staff was really high stressed, high pressured, and he was trying to help them, enable them to feel empowered to sort of gently push back, ask good questions, make sure that you don't just say yes to something that's unreasonable, advocate for yourself. But I want you to feel comfortable, even with me. We need to be able to have those kind of honest conversations. And kind of as a joke and as a practical joke / trick to see if they had really taken it on board, he said he did a fake assignment to them, and he asked them all for some ridiculous deadline. I want it Saturday at noon, and he gave it to them, Friday at 4:00 or something. And they were supposed to come back and push back. And several of them either just ignored it, which was, they knew they were probably risking not looking good. But one or two were going to cancel their plans, and he quickly stopped it. I was guys, I was just testing you. It was kind of a joke. I want you to feel comfortable pushing back. So you need to enable those kinds of honest conversations. Kind is having honest conversations so that people don't hurt themselves in the process of meeting your ridiculous expectations.
Right. No, that's wonderfully put. All right, let's do the all-star moments. You ready?
All right, I'm ready.
All right, Karen, here we go. This is, I always give credit to my colleague at the New York Jets. He always used to say, first thought, best thought. Here we go. How do you deal with adversity?
I think being resilient is the most undeveloped skill in most of us. And I think I just try to see another path forward and not let it knock me back, because what doesn't kill you makes you strong. I really believe that.
Awesome. How do you give yourself fuel?
My fuel is actually being in connection with the people I care about. So I have a walk with my husband every day, and I always joke, we solve the problems of the world, and staying connected to the people I care about. People are my fuel, and interacting with them is really wonderful.
What does never give up mean to you?
Ooh, interesting. I think that's where my mom instincts would come in. That would just never give up would be me as a parent supporting my kids, whatever that means. That's what I would say.
What is the value of collaboration?
I love collaboration. To me, it's actually far more interesting to me than doing any solo project. It's exciting and it's interesting. You build relationship, you build it together. Collaboration to me is going to get the best out of me, and I hope best out of the people I collaborate with.
So you've hired people. You just said you fired people. I was listening. What do you look for in an ideal candidate when you hire?
I don't actually look for any particular pedigree. I look for someone who's interested in the world, interested in what we do, interested and interesting, some combination. I'm looking for a bright, creative, critical thinker. The rest can be learned.
Love it. Describe yourself as a leader in one sentence.
I would hope people would say I'm a compassionate leader who understands what it feels like to walk in everyone's shoes.
Oh, that's great. Karen, this has been tremendous. I can't thank you enough. And then thank Rob Cross as well, your co-author. This has been a rich conversation and an important conversation, and I'm fairly certain that the listeners and viewers will agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. I'm so glad to have this conversation with you.
And we thank Karen very much for being on the show. My number one takeaway is this: begin with the end in mind. We talked about that. What do you want your legacy to be? Whether you're a teammate, a leader, a brother, a sister, a father, whatever the case may be, what do you want people to say about you when your time with them is no longer? Do you want them to say they helped me, they were patient with me, they taught me, they mentored me? Or do you want them to say other things? You fill in the blank. I thought that was very valuable and very appropriate for this topic. I hope you got something out of it and it made you think. Thank you very much for being part of this conversation. For our podcast producer, Paul Salazar, I am Chris Gargano. I am forever grateful for you being part of this show each and every week. Follow, subscribe, like us. We appreciate it. Take care, everybody. We'll have a great guest next week. So long on Keep the Line Moving.
We thank you for listening to Keep the Line Moving. We would love it if you subscribed or left a review. For more podcast episodes, check out our YouTube page. If you'd like to work with the Gargano Leadership Group, check out our website. This has been a GLG production, copyright 2023. For our podcast producer, Paul Salazar, and our marketing coordinator, Savin Narwal. Have a great week, everyone.